This punishment device from ancient Egypt looks very creepy, but believe me, you are about to see even creepier and more frightening devices used for punishment and torture. There were many punishments throughout history designed to break a person's spirit, but few did it in such a slow and calculated way as the Spanish donkey. It looked simple at first glance. A long wooden beam, shaped into a sharp triangular wedge, standing on sturdy legs. But this was no ordinary bench. This was a device designed to make every passing second feel worse than the last. A person placed on the Spanish donkey was made to straddle the sharp edge like it was a saddle. At first it may not have seemed unbearable, but then came the waiting. The sharp beam pressed harder and harder into the victim's body under their own weight. The longer they sat, the more the pain increased. In some cases, additional weight was tied to the victim's ankles, pulling them down and making the experience far worse. What made this punishment especially cruel was the way it turned time into an enemy. There was no sudden impact, no quick suffering. Instead, the body slowly gave in to the relentless pressure. The muscles tensed, the legs shook, and the sharp edge pressed deeper. The longer the person endured it, the harder it became to sit still. Any attempt to shift, to find relief, only made things worse. This punishment was used in different places and time periods, often in military settings as a form of discipline. It was not meant to be quick. It was meant to test patience, endurance, and the breaking point of both the mind and body. Some were left sitting for hours, others for much longer depending on the severity of their punishment. Not all punishments were about pain. Some worked in a different way, turning every moment into a struggle, making the simplest tasks impossible. The Chinese cangue was one of those punishments. It didn't tear flesh, break bones, or leave permanent scars. But it trapped people in their own bodies, making them suffer through exhaustion, shame, and sheer helplessness. A cangue was a large wooden board with a hole in the middle, locked around a person's neck. It was so wide that they couldn't reach their own face. That meant no eating, no drinking, and no wiping away sweat or insects. Everything required outside help. The board itself was heavy, sometimes weighing over 30 pounds, turning each step into a battle against gravity. It wasn't about physical pain, but about the slow grind of time. Sleep was nearly impossible. There was no way to rest comfortably with a wooden plank restricting movement. The real cruelty came with how long someone was forced to wear it. Some endured it for a few hours, others for days. The longer they wore it, the more unbearable it became. The body weakened from hunger, dehydration, and lack of sleep. The neck and shoulders throbbed from carrying the weight. But worst of all was the humiliation. Those wearing a cangue were often left in public, fully exposed to the stares and laughter of strangers. Some had messages carved or painted on the wood, announcing their crime. A thief, a liar, a traitor. But if the cangue trapped people in one place, the next device did the opposite. It didn't restrict movement. It forced the body to move in ways it was never meant to, until something gave out. Of all the punishments ever created, few inspired fear like the rack. It was infamous, legendary, and designed to do one thing: pull the human body apart, little by little, until it could take no more. This wasn't just about discomfort. It was about pushing the limits of what a body could endure before it broke. The setup was simple, but devastating. A long wooden frame with rollers on either end. A person was laid down, wrists and ankles tied with rope. Then the rollers turned. At first it was just tightness, then it became pulling, then stretching, and then something far worse. The shoulders popped, the muscles tore, and joints strained past their natural limits. Every small turn of the wheel made it worse, and the worst part, there was no way to stop it. Even before permanent damage was done, the feeling alone was terrifying. The sensation of being stretched apart, completely unable to fight back, was enough to break even the strongest. The body wasn't designed for this kind of force. Some never walked properly again, some lost function in their arms, others were left in twisted, unnatural positions, permanently damaged by the strain. The rack was more than just a machine. It was a slow, calculated test of human limits. A punishment that didn't rely on sharp edges, hot metal, or crushing weight, just the unbearable pressure of a body being pulled in opposite directions, inch by inch. And while the rack worked by stretching a person to their breaking point, another device did the exact opposite. It didn't pull, it didn't stretch, it crushed. And it did so with just as much precision. If the rack worked by stretching, this device did the opposite. It compressed. It forced the body inward, folding a person into themselves until breathing became difficult, limbs went numb, and the pressure became unbearable. This was the scavenger's daughter, a device that proved pain didn't have to come from sharp objects or brutal strikes. Sometimes, it was enough to simply crush a person under their own weight. It looked deceptively simple, just a series of iron bars forming a loop. But once a person was locked in, the real horror began. The victim's arms were forced behind their back, their knees pulled up against their chest, and their head pushed forward. Then, the metal frame was tightened. The body was trapped in an unnatural position, muscles strained, ribs pressed against lungs, and blood circulation cut off. At first it was just uncomfortable, but the longer someone was trapped, the worse it got. Breathing became shallow, limbs started to go numb. The pressure inside the body increased so much that some people reportedly bled from their nose and ears. Unlike the rack, which worked by pulling things apart, this device crushed everything inward, turning the body into its own source of suffering. The scavenger's daughter was not fast. It worked through slow, constant compression, until the body couldn't take anymore. A test of endurance just as cruel as being stretched apart. But while this device folded people in on themselves, the next one did something far worse. It shattered them completely. There were punishments designed to humiliate, some meant to frighten, and others created to destroy a person completely. The breaking wheel belonged to the last category. It didn't just injure, it didn't just punish, it pulverized the human body, leaving behind something barely recognizable. It started with a simple wooden wheel, large, sturdy, built to last. A person was tied to it, their limbs stretched across the spokes. Then came the real horror. Each blow shattered another part of the body, turning solid limbs into nothing but useless fragments beneath the skin. This wasn't fast, the strikes were measured and deliberate. Too quick and the person might lose consciousness, too soft and they might not break properly. The worst cases didn't end with broken bones alone. The breaking wheel was designed to make a person feel every second of their punishment. It wasn't about quick pain or sudden impact, it was about slow destruction, about being left in a state where nothing worked, nothing moved, and yet, consciousness remained. But while this device turned people into lifeless husks, others worked in a different way. Some punishments didn't rely on pain at all. Instead, they relied on humiliation, turning a person into a laughingstock for the whole town to see. Some punishments didn't need pain to be effective. They worked by breaking a person's reputation, turning them into an object of mockery, making sure their name would never be forgotten, but for all the wrong reasons. One of the most infamous of these punishments was the pillory. It was a simple wooden frame with holes for the head and hands. Once locked in place, the person was trapped, unable to move, unable to protect themselves from whatever came next. And what came next was never good. The crowd gathered. People shouted insults. Some threw food, rotten fruit, eggs, whatever they could find. Others weren't so kind, launching stones or filth instead. Unlike other punishments, the pillory didn't end in injury, at least not officially. The device itself didn't break bones or cause suffering, but that didn't mean it wasn't brutal. The real pain came from time, standing there for hours, exposed to the heat, the cold, the rain, unable to shift or even scratch an itch. And then there was the shame, knowing that everyone saw you as a criminal, knowing that even after you were released, the memory would never fade. Some who endured the pillory were never quite the same. Some became outcasts, unable to return to normal life. Others faced injuries, not from the device but from the crowd. In some cases, the public turned violent, throwing more than just insults. And when that happened, there was no escape. The pillory wasn't about destroying the body, it was about destroying a person's dignity, and for many, that was a punishment far worse than pain. Some punishments relied on fire, others on steel, but this one used something even more unpredictable: water. It didn't break bones or leave lasting wounds, but it could terrify, humiliate, and leave a person gasping for breath. The ducking stool was a punishment designed to make sure its victims suffered under the weight of both their crime and the water beneath them. It looked almost like a chair, but not one meant for comfort. A wooden seat, mounted on a long beam, usually placed near a river or pond. A person, often someone accused of gossiping, scolding, or being a public nuisance, was strapped in, completely helpless. Then with a sharp pull, they were plunged into the water. The first few seconds were just shock. The icy water rushed in, filling the nose and mouth before they were yanked back up. But relief never lasted long. A few desperate gasps of air, a moment to process what had just happened, and then another drop. Again and again they were submerged, each time staying underwater a little longer, each time growing more exhausted, more panicked. This punishment wasn't about pain, it was about fear. The fear of not knowing when the next plunge was coming. The fear of not getting enough air before being dragged down again. The fear of not coming back up at all. The people watching might have laughed, jeered, even cheered. But to the person in that chair, the minutes felt endless. Some punishment devices were as much about fear as they were about suffering. Few things struck terror like the Iron Maiden, a tall coffin-like structure lined with sharp spikes on the inside. It wasn't designed for a quick punishment. It was meant to trap its victim in a tight, enclosed space, making every small movement a mistake. The idea was simple. A person was placed inside, standing upright, and the heavy doors were shut. The spikes weren't meant to pierce deeply, just enough to discourage movement. Trapped in the darkness with no room to shift, every breath had to be measured, every twitch calculated. Unlike other devices which worked through force, this one used stillness as its greatest weapon. The more a person struggled, the worse it got. Though the Iron Maiden is often associated with medieval Europe, many historians believe it was more of a legend than a widely used punishment. But that didn't stop people from fearing it. The mere idea of being locked away, completely surrounded with no way out, that alone was enough to make it one of history's most infamous devices. But while the Iron Maiden kept its victims standing, locked in place, the next device forced them into a position that was just as unbearable. And instead of sharp spikes, it used gravity as its weapon. Some punishments were brutal, others were psychological. And then there were those that relied on positioning alone to make every second worse than the last. The Judas cradle was one of them, a triangular wooden structure designed to make sitting down the worst possible choice. It worked like this. A person was lowered onto the sharp, pyramid-shaped seat, their body forced into an unnatural posture. At first it may have seemed manageable, but that feeling never lasted. The longer they remained there, the more the weight of their own body worked against them. Their legs trembled, their muscles burned, and any attempt to shift only made things worse. Unlike devices that crushed, stretched, or pierced, this one relied entirely on gravity. There were no chains pulling in opposite directions, no heavy restraints, just a person's own weight, pressing down in a way the body was never meant to handle. It wasn't a fast punishment. Instead, it was a slow, creeping discomfort that grew worse with time. Every second spent on the Judas cradle was a test of endurance, a battle between exhaustion and control. But while the Judas cradle forced people into stillness, the next device did something different. It wasn't about pain at all. It was about humiliation, control, and making sure two people who hated each other had no choice but to face their problem together. Not every punishment relied on pain. Some were meant to force reflection, to turn frustration inward, and to make an argument last longer than anyone wanted. The shrew's fiddle was one of those punishments, a simple wooden or metal collar, but one with a cruel design. It locked two people together, face to face, with no way to escape each other. This device was often used for those who wouldn't stop fighting, neighbors, siblings, or, more commonly, women accused of gossiping or arguing too much. Their wrists and necks were locked into the fiddle, trapping their hands in front of them like they were holding an invisible violin. And that was the worst part. With their hands bound, there was no way to push each other away, no way to stop the uncomfortable closeness. They were forced to stand side by side or directly facing each other, for hours or even days, with only one option: talk it out or endure the unbearable awkwardness of their silence. The weight of the device made even small movements difficult, so fighting wasn't an option. It was a punishment based on irony. If two people argued too much, they were forced to spend even more time together, unable to escape their own words. But while the shrew's fiddle forced people into uncomfortable closeness, the next device made sure no words were spoken at all. It didn't punish arguments, it ended them entirely. There have been many ways to punish speech throughout history, but few were as direct and humiliating as the brank, also known as the scold's bridle. This metal mask wasn't designed to restrain movement, it was designed to silence. A metal cage shaped to fit tightly around the head, with a thin, flat plate that pressed against the tongue. Once locked in place, speaking became impossible. Any attempt to talk resulted in sharp pain, and even breathing could become difficult. It wasn't just the physical discomfort that made the brank so cruel, it was the public nature of the punishment. Those forced to wear it were often paraded through town. Their crime, usually gossip, public outbursts, or insulting someone of higher status, announced to the people around them. The brank wasn't just about stopping speech, it was about making sure everyone knew that speech had been stopped. It was a device of humiliation, designed to make sure the lesson lasted long after the mask was removed. Some versions had additional metal spikes inside, pressing against the tongue or cheeks if the wearer tried to move their mouth. Others had bells attached, ensuring that everyone knew when the person was approaching. There was no hiding it, no escaping the silent message it sent. But while the brank was meant to silence, the next device did something completely different. It wasn't about speech, it was about shame. And instead of trapping the head, it trapped the entire body inside a punishment that left no dignity behind. Some punishments were about suffering, others were about humiliation. The drunkard's cloak fell squarely into the second category. It didn't cause direct harm, but it turned the offender into a walking joke, making sure that their mistake was seen, laughed at, and remembered. It was a large wooden barrel with holes cut out for the arms and head, worn like an oversized, ridiculous coat. A person caught drunk in public, especially repeat offenders, would be forced to wear it and walk through town, stumbling under its weight while people pointed and laughed. The real punishment wasn't the discomfort, though the weight and awkwardness of moving in the barrel made every step a struggle. The real punishment was being turned into a spectacle. People threw insults, children laughed, and former drinking friends suddenly pretended they had never seen the person before. A night of bad decisions became a full-day reminder of why it had been a mistake. For many, this was enough to stop them from drinking to excess again. For others, it only made things worse, driving them further into their habits out of sheer embarrassment. Either way, once someone wore the drunkard's cloak, they were unlikely to forget it. But while this punishment forced a person to carry their own shame, the next device took that idea even further. It didn't just weigh them down, it locked them in place, making every moment feel heavier than the last. Some punishment devices were large and intimidating, designed to make a person suffer the moment they were placed inside, but others were much smaller, almost unremarkable at first glance. The thumbscrew was one of these, a simple device, made of metal, small enough to fit in a pocket yet capable of delivering some of the worst localized pain imaginable. It worked with a basic but cruel mechanism. A person's thumbs, fingers, or even toes were placed between two flat metal plates. Then, with each turn of the screw, the plates pressed tighter and tighter, crushing whatever was inside. The pressure started light, just enough to be uncomfortable. But with each twist, the pain increased. The worst part was how precise and controlled the device was. It wasn't fast and it wasn't unpredictable. The person watching decided exactly how far it would go, how much pressure was applied, and when, or if, it would stop. There was no sudden snap, no unexpected break, just a slow, steady force that wouldn't stop until it was loosened. Some devices looked terrifying just by their design, and few were as unsettling as the pear of anguish. A cold, metal object, shaped like a blooming flower, but with a purpose that had nothing to do with beauty. It wasn't designed to crush or cut, it was designed to open. The mechanism was simple. When closed, the pear of anguish was small, easy to insert into the mouth, throat, or even other body openings. But then, the screw was turned, and the device began to expand. The metal petals slowly widened, stretching whatever space they were inside. Unlike the thumbscrew, which focused pressure in one place, this one pushed outward in every direction at once. At first, it just created a feeling of pressure, something unnatural and impossible to ignore. But the more it expanded, the worse it became. Jaws locked open until the muscles burned, throats pressed against their limits, and internal tissues were stretched far beyond what they were meant to handle. Despite its fearsome reputation, there's little evidence that the pear of anguish was widely used. Some historians believe it was more of a threat than an actual device of punishment. But whether or not it was truly put into action, its design alone was enough to make it one of history's most unsettling creations. While the pear of anguish was meant for silence, the next device focused on something very different. It wasn't about causing pain, it was about humiliating those who made the wrong kind of noise. There were punishments for thieves, for liars, and for people who wouldn't stop talking. But what about musicians? In medieval Europe, even bad music could be punished, and the flute of shame was made to make sure no one ever forgot their mistakes. It looked like an oversized metal flute, but it had no use as an instrument. Instead, it was a punishment collar, shaped like a wind instrument, locked around a person's neck. The musician's fingers were placed inside metal rings, forcing them to hold the flute as if they were about to play it. But there was no music, just the mockery of the crowd. The punishment wasn't physical, though the heavy metal collar made every movement difficult. The real suffering came from public humiliation. The condemned were paraded through the streets, forced to wear the instrument they had failed to master, while onlookers laughed and jeered. In some cases, they were even forced to perform their silent shame, a cruel joke that left their reputation in ruins. The flute of shame proved that sometimes the worst punishment wasn't pain, but being made a laughingstock. And no device in history embodied that idea more than the next one, a punishment so simple yet so effective that it was used for centuries to keep society in check. There was no escaping the stocks, not physically, not mentally, and certainly not socially. A person locked inside was trapped, exposed, and completely at the mercy of the crowd, and that was exactly the point. Unlike other punishment devices which relied on pain, restriction, or physical suffering, the stocks focused on humiliation. A person's feet, and sometimes hands or head, were locked into a wooden frame, leaving them in a position that made even simple movement impossible. They were placed in a public space, right in the center of town, where everyone could see them. The punishment wasn't just the discomfort of being stuck in an awkward position for hours. It was about the loss of dignity. The crowd didn't just watch, they participated. People threw food, mud, insults, whatever they could find. Some laughed, some scolded, some even got violent, and the person in the stocks? They could do nothing but endure it all, waiting for the sentence to end. It was simple, effective, and widely used across Europe and colonial America. No blood, no broken bones, just complete and utter embarrassment. For many, a day in the stocks was more than enough to change their behavior forever. That's about it. Write in the comments which punishment device scared you the most. For more useful information, watch other videos.